is losing sleep. Someone who underestimated you is questioning everything. Someone who laughed at your pain is choking on the irony of their own downfall. And the most beautiful part, the part that makes this entire story a masterpiece, is that you didn't say a word. You didn't announce your arrival. You didn't warn them. You didn't need to. Because revenge, real revenge, the kind that rewrites entire realities, doesn't knock on the door. It just walks in, sits down, and watches them realize they've already lost. Welcome back, you silent storm. This isn't a story about getting even. This is a documentary about how you became the earthquake no one saw coming. Let's establish something crucial right here, right now, before we go any deeper into this reckoning. They thought silence meant weakness. They interpreted your quiet as surrender, your distance as defeat, your absence as erasure. For months, maybe years, they watched you disappear from their stage, exit their drama, leave their circus without fanfare or fury. And in their arrogance, in their desperate need to control the narrative, they celebrated. They told themselves you ran away. They convinced each other you couldn't handle the heat. They whispered in group chats, laughed in private conversations, toasted to your supposed downfall with glasses raised and egos inflated. But here's what they missed, what they couldn't see through their fog of self-importance. You weren't running, you were loading. While they were busy performing for an audience of enablers and co-conspirators, you were becoming something they couldn't recognize anymore. You stopped defending yourself because you realized defense was beneath you. You stopped explaining because you understood that people committed to misunderstanding you will twist your words no matter how clear you speak. You stopped showing up to arguments they started because you finally grasped the most powerful truth of psychological warfare. The person who stops playing the game doesn't lose. They transcend it. And transcendence, my friend, is the most devastating form of revenge because it's unreachable, untouchable, and utterly unforgivable to people who thrive on dragging others down to their level. You didn't climb higher. You built a different dimension entirely. They needed you angry, reactive, desperate to prove your worth to them. They fed on your explanations, your justifications, your attempts to make them understand your perspective. Every time you tried to defend yourself, you gave them exactly what they wanted. Your energy, your attention, your precious time and emotional bandwidth poured into the black hole of their judgment. But then something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was clarity. Maybe it was the moment you looked in the mirror and realized you were shrinking yourself to fit into the understanding of people who were never going to get it anyway. Whatever the catalyst, you stopped. You went ghost. Not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of the most terrifying realization possible for your enemies. They weren't worth the breath it took to correct them. And that silence, oh, that silence. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of growth they couldn't see. Full of healing they couldn't track. Full of transformation they couldn't monitor or measure or control. While they were refreshing your social media looking for signs of your destruction, you were building an empire in the shadows. While they were analyzing your absence for weakness, you were developing strength they couldn't comprehend. While they were celebrating your exit, you were preparing an entrance that would make them question every assumption they'd ever made about power, about success, about who gets to win in the end. You became the answer to a question they weren't smart enough to ask. What happens when the person you underestimate decides to stop trying to make you see their value? Here's what they'll never admit, what they'll take to their deathbeds before confessing out loud. They were obsessed with you. Not fascinated, not curious, obsessed. You lived in their heads rent-free, mortgage-free, completely ownership of their mental real estate without paying a single dollar or demanding any acknowledgement. They talked about you when you weren't there. They brought your name up in conversations that had nothing to do with you. They checked on you, stalked your progress, monitored your movements like you were a stock they'd invested their entire ego into watching crash. Except you didn't crash. You flew. And That unforgivable ascension is what's killing them slowly, quietly, in ways they can't even articulate to their therapists. Think about the psychology of that obsession for a moment, because it reveals everything about their character and nothing about yours. People who are secure, who are genuinely happy, who are authentically powerful, they don't spend their energy tracking the downfall of others. They don't need to. Their fulfillment comes from their own growth, their own achievements, their own internal sense of purpose and peace. But these people, the ones who made you their project, their case study, their daily entertainment, they were empty, hollow, running on the fumes of comparison and the cheap high of feeling superior to someone they decided was beneath them. You were the mirror they couldn't stop staring into, and every time they looked, they saw everything they weren't. Your authenticity exposed their performance. Your integrity highlighted their manipulation. Your silence screamed their insecurity. They needed your failure like addicts need their fix. Because if you succeeded, if you thrived, if you became everything you were meant to be despite their efforts to stop you, it meant their entire worldview was wrong. It meant that cruelty doesn't win. It meant that manipulation has an expiration date. It meant that all their tactics, all their schemes, all their carefully crafted narratives about why they were justified in treating you the way they did, were nothing but elaborate lies they told themselves to sleep at night. Your success wasn't just your victory. It was their worst nightmare, coming true in high definition, surround sound, and there was no remote control to turn it off. You became the living proof that good doesn't just survive evil. It outlasts it, outgrows it, and eventually forgets it even existed. But here's where your revenge reached. Levels of artistry they couldn't comprehend, where your silence became a weapon more dangerous than any confrontation could have been. You didn't just succeed. You succeeded without them knowing the details. You didn't broadcast your wins. You didn't post your victories. You didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing your progress in real time so they could find ways to diminish it, minimize it, or explain it away as luck, timing, or anything other than what it actually was. Your undeniable excellence. They got to see the finished product, the fully transformed version of you, without getting to witness the process. And that absence of information, that gap in their surveillance, it drove them absolutely insane. Because now they can't say they saw it coming. They can't pretend they always knew you had potential. They can't rewrite history and claim they were always supportive, always believing in you, always rooting for your success behind the scenes. The evidence is too clear. The timeline is too documented. They tried to break you. They failed. And now they have to live with that failure every single day, watching you exist in a reality they tried to prevent you from reaching. Your very existence became the revenge. Your breathing became the reminder. Your thriving became the torture they inflicted on themselves by underestimating someone who was always going to outlast their cruelty. You didn't need to do anything to them. You just needed to become undeniable. Let's talk about the moment, the precise instant, when they realized they miscalculated. It wasn't dramatic. There was no movie soundtrack, no slow-motion revelation, no theatrical confrontation where truth gets spoken and justice gets served. It was quieter than that, more devastating than that. It was the moment they heard your name in a context they weren't prepared for. Maybe someone praised you. Maybe someone mentioned your success. Maybe someone asked why they weren't connected to you anymore, and they had to scramble for an explanation that didn't make them look like the villain they actually were. That moment, that split second of recognition, when they understood that you weren't the person they'd decided you were. You were so much more. And oh, the panic that must have flooded their system in that instant. The cold realization spreading through their chest like ice water in their veins. Because if you weren't who they said you were, if you weren't weak, broken, defeated, destroyed by their treatment, then what did that make them? It made them wrong. Publicly, irreversibly, undeniably wrong. And for people who built their entire identity on being right, on being the ones who could see through others, on being the judges and juries of everyone's character, being wrong isn't just embarrassing. It's existential. It means everything they thought they knew about reading people, about manipulating situations, about controlling outcomes, was based on a foundation of quicksand. And you were the earthquake that revealed how unstable their ground always was. They tried to reach out, didn't they? Maybe not directly at first. Maybe through mutual friends, through subtle social media interactions, through carefully worded messages that tested the waters to see if you'd forgotten what they did. They wanted back in, not because they missed you, not because they realized your value, but because your absence made them look bad. Your success without them in it made people ask questions. Why aren't you two connected anymore? What happened there? And suddenly they're scrambling to control a narrative that already moved on without them. They're trying to rewrite history while you're busy writing the future. And that desperation, that sudden interest in rebuilding what they destroyed, it's the sweetest confirmation you could ever receive. You passed the test they didn't even know they were taking. See, they thought the test was whether you could survive without them, whether you could function after they cut you off, discarded you, treated you like you were replaceable and forgettable. They thought the answer would be no. They were betting on your collapse. But the real test, the one that mattered, was whether they could thrive without you, whether their lives would feel as full, as meaningful, as vibrant without your energy in it. And the answer, the undeniable truth they're now forced to live with every day, is no, they can't. Their lives are dimmer, their circles are smaller, their joy is shallower, because they removed someone rare and tried to replace you with people common. And common will never feel like magic, no matter how many of them they collect. Here's the part that will haunt them forever, the ghost that will follow them through every future relationship, every new friendship, every professional connection they try to build. They'll always wonder if they're making the same mistake again. Every time they dismiss someone, every time they underestimate someone, every time they treat someone as less than, they'll remember you. They'll remember the person who proved them wrong so thoroughly, so completely, that it became a reference point for all their future judgments. You didn't just beat them. You became the standard by which they measure their own capacity for error. You're the cautionary tale they tell themselves, the reminder that their perception isn't as sharp as they thought, that their judgment isn't as sound as they believed. You're the one that got away, not romantically, but intellectually, spiritually, karmically, the one they should have kept. Now let's dissect what actually happened here, because this isn't just about you winning and them losing. This is about understanding the mechanics of how quiet revenge actually works, how silence becomes the most lethal weapon in your arsenal when deployed with precision and patience. Most people, when they're hurt, when they're betrayed, when they're disrespected, they react immediately. They confront, they call out, they blast, they expose. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes immediate response is necessary. But you chose a different path. You chose the long game. And the long game, when played correctly, doesn't just win the battle. It wins the war, rewrites the history books, and makes future battles impossible because your enemies destroyed themselves trying to fight a ghost. The first principle of silent revenge is complete withdrawal of access. They don't get your energy anymore. They don't get your reactions. They don't get to know what you're thinking, feeling, planning, or becoming. You cut them off from the fuel that powered their ego, which was your attention, your response, your willingness to engage with their provocations and manipulations. And when you remove that fuel, when you stop feeding the beast, something miraculous happens. They start consuming themselves. They start fighting with their own thoughts. They start questioning their own narratives. Because without you there to confirm or deny their version of events, their story starts falling apart. It needs your participation to hold together. Without you in it, it's just fiction they're telling themselves. The second principle is invisible growth. While they're looking for signs of your breakdown, you're building skills they can't see. You're forming connections they don't know about. You're developing yourself in dimensions they can't track because they're not in your life anymore to measure your progress. This is crucial. If they can see you growing, they'll find ways to interfere, to slow you down, to plant doubt in your mind or in the minds of people around you. But when your growth happens in the dark, when your transformation occurs outside their field of vision, they can't do anything to stop it. And then, when you emerge, when you step back into any shared space or mutual social circle, you're not the person they remember. You're upgraded. You're unrecognizable. You're beyond their comprehension. The third principle is strategic visibility. This is where most people mess up. They either stay completely hidden forever, which means their revenge never lands, or they come back too loud, too obvious, too desperate to show off what they've become. Neither approach maximizes impact. The sweet spot is selective visibility. You let pieces of your new reality leak through. A mutual friend mentions your success. An old colleague shares a post about your achievement. Someone asks about you and gets an answer that surprises them. These breadcrumbs, these small revelations that trickle back to your enemies without you directly giving them information, they're devastating. Because now they're hearing about your success from other people, which makes it undeniable. They can't dismiss it as you bragging. They can't minimize it as exaggeration. It's verified by third parties. It's real, and it's killing them. The fourth principle, and this is where it gets philosophical, is genuine indifference. This can't be faked. You can't pretend not to care while secretly obsessing over whether they're watching, whether they're hurting, whether they're regretting. That's not revenge. That's still being attached. Real revenge happens when you genuinely stop caring about their opinion, their perspective, their regret or lack thereof. When you reach the point where their existence doesn't register on your emotional radar anymore, where you could run into them and feel nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not anything at all, that's when you've won completely. Because now they can't hurt you, they can't affect you, they're powerless. And for people who once had power over your emotions, over your peace, over your sense of self-worth, becoming powerless is the ultimate defeat. The fifth and final principle is compound effect over time. Your revenge isn't a single moment. It's every day that you wake up better than you were yesterday. It's every month that passes where you're achieving things they said you couldn't. It's every year that you prove their assessment of your character was wrong. Revenge isn't an event. It's a lifestyle. It's who you become in defiance of who they said you were. And the beautiful thing about compound revenge is that it doesn't require maintenance. You're not plotting. You're not scheming. You're not investing energy into making them suffer. You're just living your best life, and their suffering is an automatic byproduct of your success. They hurt themselves by watching you win. You don't have to do anything except continue being excellent. Here's what's happening right now, in real time, while you're watching this, reading these words, feeling this validation sink into your bones. They're watching. Maybe not literally at this exact second, but consistently, obsessively, with a frequency that would embarrass them if anyone knew. They check your profiles. They ask about you. They notice when you post and when you don't. They track your movements through the digital breadcrumbs you leave behind, through the mutual connections you share, through the spaces you occupy that overlap with theirs. And every single time they look, every single time they check, they're hoping for two contradictory things simultaneously. They're hoping you've failed, so they can feel justified in how they treated you. And they're hoping you've succeeded, so they can try to worm their way back into your life and claim some credit. But what they keep finding, what keeps destroying them bit by bit, scroll by scroll, update by update, is that you're fine, better than fine. You're thriving. And you're thriving without any reference to them whatsoever. You're not posting cryptic messages about fake friends. You're not sharing quotes about betrayal. You're not giving them the satisfaction of knowing they still occupy space in your head. Your content, your energy, your entire digital and physical presence is forward-focused, future-oriented, completely unbothered by the past they're still trapped in. And that absence of acknowledgement, that complete lack of emotional residue from what they did to you, it's driving them insane. Because they want to matter, even negatively, even as the villain. They want to know they had an impact, but you won't even give them that. Think about the psychological torture of watching someone you tried to destroy become everything you're not. Every photo of you smiling is a reminder that their cruelty didn't stick. Every achievement you post is evidence that their sabotage didn't work. Every new connection you make, every opportunity you attract, every level you reach, it's all proof that you were never the problem. They were. And now they have to sit with that knowledge, that undeniable reality, while maintaining the facade that they're fine, that they've moved on, that they never think about you. But we both know that's a lie. They think about you constantly. You're the itch they can't scratch, the question they can't answer, the mistake they can't undo. You're permanent in their psyche in ways they'll never be in yours. And here's the twist, the plot development they never saw coming. You're not just succeeding in the areas they expected you to fail. You're succeeding in dimensions they didn't know existed. You're finding joy in places they never looked. You're building a life so far removed from the version they tried to trap you in that if they saw the full picture, they wouldn't even recognize it as belonging to the same person. You evolved. You didn't just get better at the game you were playing. You started playing a completely different game on a completely different board with completely different rules. And they're still sitting there, playing the old game, wondering why you're not on the board anymore. It's because you built your own board. You created your own